Hey there, my name is Andrew Nyberg, and I'm going to be reading my piece of short fiction, The Saddest Missile, which was originally published by Fleas on the Dog in issue 9. If you haven't checked out Fleas on the Dog, I'd highly encourage you to go read a few stories and poems from there. It's a fantastic journal. I've enjoyed everything I've encountered through them. So, The Saddest Missile. Sam was a missile, the saddest intercontinental ballistic missile in all the world. Sam sat at the bottom of the silo, his black nose cone half hidden in the high shadows near the launch hatch, his housing luminescent with the greenish-white glow of the fluorescent lights mounted at regular intervals around the walls. The floors never stopped humming with the single-note vibration, and a single computer console on a wheeled cart read the zeros and ones that transmitted wirelessly from numerous diagnostic sensors but did not receive. A multicolored flag was stamped on Sam's side just above his guidance panel. He didn't know why, but he felt he should be extraordinarily proud of that flag, that he should be willing to do anything in his power for it. He didn't understand what the flag represented, but it was important to his makers, and if he didn't honor what was important to them, how could he find anything of value? So it was that he waited day in and day out for his turn to launch, spreading his fins aerodynamically, pulsing with the life of his targeting chip. The other missiles in the neighboring silos couldn't see how precisely his rivets had been set, how the seams of the sheets of curved, cool metal met so perfectly that even air couldn't slip through. The maintenance crews didn't seem to notice with their rags and oils and polishes. They treated him like any other missile. If only someone would give him a second glance, they'd see his sleekness, his lethality, the glorious shine of his housing. After all, he aspired one day to launch, to rise up on a bed of flames and ascend into the clouds on heat and light, to detonate in the sky over the city into a new, fleeting sun. The thought alone made Sam's payload rumble with energy. So glorious, Sam thought, to launch from the earth on a bed of fire and detonate in the sky in an even bigger and more destructive fireball than the one that launched me. It was all any of the missiles in the surrounding silos ever talked about, so how could Sam not get swept up in their shared dream? How could he not ache to be noticed, armed, and launched? Then came the first time. Airman Fred ambled through the silo in his blue jumpsuit with the insignias on the sleeves, the beady lensed glasses, and the white rag in his hand that polished Sam's casing so that it gleamed white as a smile. Airman Fred was fresh out of training. Sam gathered from the ribbing his fellow crewmen gave him. They shared a lot of laughs at Fred's expense, but Fred just chuckled and shook his head and went about his work. When he was done, Fred patted Sam on the fin and said, "You're a fine missile, the finest there ever was. One day you'll make me proud. You'll make the whole nation proud." If Sam could cry, tears would have run down Sam's fins from his nose casing, and he just knew Fred would have wiped them off with arcing sweeps of his rag. The next day, Fred came in carrying a cucumber sandwich in his left hand, and before he got to work, he shook his head and said, "I'll launch you, little buddy. You're a fine missile. No way they could let a fine missile like you sit too long without a launching." Sam thought about launching every day, about the blue sky he'd see when he was transported from the missile factory to the base in the silo, about the trees growing smaller and how a city or town would rush towards him before he blew up. He heard one by one the other missiles in their distant silos giving birth to columns of flame as they flew away to their beautiful fiery detonations. When the base fell quiet between skirmishes and the guards' footsteps faded down the metal halls, Sam would let his booster warm just a little until he slipped into dreams of what his silo looked like from the sky. One afternoon, Airman Fred didn't polish Sam. Sam waited as the night guards relieved the afternoon guards and the morning guards relieved the night guards. Finally, Fred's door opened and Fred waddled in backwards, pulling a metal cart with another missile strapped on top. Sam grew excited until he realized Fred wasn't going to stop and polish his casing. Fred backed towards the door on the other side, a loose wheel on the cart wobbling and squeaking. A dark cloud hung on his brow, and he bit his lip and ground his jaw. Fred glanced to Sam, wiped tears off his cheek, and sighed. "No time to polish you today, little buddy. Got to take care of a dud." Sam watched the missile until it vanished down the hallway. He'd never seen a dud before. Did the housing look as white as Sam's? Were the fins the same sleek gray? It looked every bit like a missile, but somehow, knowing that it was incapable of detonating over the enemy made it look like something else entirely, too. A couple hours later, Fred came back through without the missile, without the cart, and without his rag. He came on through and passed out the far door, unwilling to even look at Sam. It was moving to Sam to see just how much the missiles mattered to Fred. He was different than the other maintenance folk and the technicians. An unease passed through his circuits as he realized that if he fired, he'd never see Airman Fred again. Never be polished by him. Wouldn't hear his gruff voice. Would it be so bad if he never launched? Would he always have Fred? Or would Fred be one day reassigned? What would be the point of being a missile if not to be launched? What if they ran out of targets? Could there be a God if there was nothing to blow up? It was all too confusing for something so simple as a missile to process. As night set on the silo shortly before the end of summer, and the last rays from the sun backed out of the hole like a dying flame, Sam wondered if he could just launch himself. Fire without purpose to detonate in the sky. Would his explosion be just as glorious if he did not strike an object? Could a launch without a target be meaningful? Sam didn't have the answers, and it started to seem like Fred came less and less. When he did, sometimes he did not even polish. He'd just walk in a circle around Sam, shaking his head, muttering, and then walk on out the other hall. Finally, Fred did linger. He draped his rag over one of Sam's fins and settled his hands on his hip as if all the weight of the war rested on his shoulders. "Gotta go away, little buddy," Fred said. "Been transferred. Not much need for a missile polisher these days. It's all lasers now. They're gonna send me to space to polish satellites. I'm gonna ride up into the skies on a rocket ship." Jealousy consumed Sam, imagining Fred riding up into space on a bed of flame, and a different fire burned in Sam's housing as he waited and waited. The next month, one of his gray guiding fins fell away from the side of his propulsion housing. Eventually, one of his internal sensors shut down, and another indicated that his fuel had been contaminated. His internal guidance chip broke. More months passed, and then years. Eventually, some technicians opened a door at the base of Sam's silo dressed in white coats smudged with grease. They carried clipboards and had noses like birds, and they brushed away cobwebs while they walked. Looks like this one's got to be junk too, the first technician said. Yeah, too bad they didn't launch this one when the wars were still hot, the second technician said. I bet this was one damn fine missile. You got that right, the first technician said. It would have blowed up good. They don't make them like this no more. They don't fight wars like this no more, the second technician said, shaking his head. The end. I want to thank you for your time. Thank you for listening to my story. And if you have any interest in exploring my work further, check out my collection of poems, The Goats Have Taken Over the Barracks, as well as my story, The Table for Two, which recently appeared in the journal The Wondrous Reel.